Palworld Pokemon plagiarism accusations pile up as the CEO responds. Artists accused of copying 3D models. Pocket Pair claims it's received death threats and abuse. So somebody with a lot of time on their hands has started to point out, yes, these ears, this neckerchief. On Monday, the game's director and CEO of developer Pocket Pair, Takuro Mizobe, posted a response to the accusations. While he did not deny any influence from Pokemon, he claimed the game's artist had received online abuse and called for it to stop. Quote, "We are currently receiving abusive and defamatory comments against our artists, in addition to tweets that appear to be death threats. While we have received various opinions about Palworld, it is important to note that the supervision of all materials related to Palworld is conducted by a team, including myself. I bear the responsibility for the produced materials. I would appreciate it if these comments towards artists involved in Palworld would cease." However, the accusations against Palworld took another turn on Sunday when an anonymous Twitter account appeared claiming to show evidence of not just design inspiration, but plagiarism of actual game assets. User Yo posted several videos comparing Palworld's in-game 3D models to those of Pokemon and claimed to show evidence that they were likely copied. While none of the half-dozen models compared by the Twitter user appear to be one-to-one copies, they claim that their proportions were nearly identical to Pokemon models exported from Switch's Scarlet and Violet games. So here you can kind of see.
So the Palworld model's just white. And he's going back and forth between that and the Pokemon model, which is a light gray.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of hard to see the difference, but they're close.
Here it is in wireframe.
This is actually two different Pokemon, but
okay,
like it's a different PAL. It's a different comparison.
This is kind of an ass way to compare it because half of it's hidden, so you don't see how much it perfectly aligns.
According to two experienced AAA game artists who spoke to VGC, the model comparisons on Twitter are likely evidence that Palworld's character models were indeed based on Pokemon assets. Look, if you show me those wireframes lining up 100% perfectly, like somebody just squashed and stretched them, show me the UVs, show me that the UV layout is exactly identical, then maybe I'll give you some, credence there.
If you break it down to its most primitive form, you could theoretically take a Pokemon at its side view, trace it on a piece of paper, and then manually recreate it from scratch. At what point, does it constitute it's okay, you made it?
Well, the meshes don't really matter. It's more the end result, right? The end result can't look substantially similar to the other character. But so the question will be where the line is as to how much difference there is in the two designs, whether or not they're legally distinct. And some of them are really close, but there are other examples of other things that are pretty damn close and hasn't been an issue. So it's a very case-by-case situation, and it'll be up to whether Nintendo or Pokemon wants to sue, and whether or not Palworld wants to bother with a lawsuit, or more likely just update the designs if Pokemon has an issue with any of them.
I said that before podcast Cool 2T that we should make an OCA Palworld server. So join the Discord if you want to join the Palworld server.
We're slaves as far as you can see.
They all yearn for the mines.
Another senior character artist in the games industry agreed the model comparisons could be compelling evidence of plagiarism. The wireframe meshes look different, so they're not the same models, but it's so close that they may have been built over the top of the Pokemon models and made a few changes so they aren't exactly the same.
What about parody law?
Exactly, yeah. As we already looked at the adult video parody, if they can do it, so can Palworld.
Yeah,
Palworld just needs to put dicks in their mouths.
There would be a real question of whether or not this is considered a parody or not.
Pretty abundantly clear to me, but hey, I'm just one guy.
The Sobel one is weird because it almost has to be a rip, right? Like they're kind of similar, but at the same time, Palworld Fin is pretty different geometrically. This one also had a telltale sunken geometry aspect to it. Okay.
I hate how they say it has to be a rip, and then they say they're kind of similar. Like, what is it?
This one keeps me up at night. Are they the same? Not really. Not even close. Like this is like a heart shape, and this is more like a oven mitt shape. David Hansel, an intellectual property and digital media lawyer at Hansel Henson, told VGC that if it could be proven that elements of the 3D models were the same, then it would represent a smoking gun for any legal case brought forward by the Pokemon Company. It's down to Nintendo to absolutely prove copying, not merely taking influence, he told VGC. Quote, it's got to be obvious copying. You look at one picture and you look at the other alongside it. The industry would have come to an end years ago if you weren't allowed to take influence. You can't have a monopoly on a certain style of artwork. It literally has to be copying. The Pokemon Company will be looking for a smoking gun. And these 3D model videos could be gold dust for the lawyers because they're not just thematically similar from what those videos show. It could be extremely compelling evidence of copying. If those are original Pokemon models shown in those videos, then Nintendo should be home and dry in terms of demonstrating copying. That could be a smoking gun. Hogue law attorney Richard Hogue commented, quote, I can't speak to the science used in this Twitter account, but certainly evidence of actual assets being stolen is the kind of thing that is likely to make a more successful case. Simply being inspired by existing designs, even if that goes so far as to use certain design rules, proportions, coloration, curve usage, eye size, etc., is generally not. Speaking to Japanese site Automation, Pocket Pair CEO Mizobe claimed that Palworld had cleared legal reviews and that there has been no action taken against it by other companies. So this person said that I'm a technical animator. I rig 3D models for a living. I did this quick test by intentionally tampering with Superior's bones to just match the bones of Azurobe. And well, look for yourself. Funny how edge loops work.
So those cone things are the
those are joints, yeah.
bones.
This is Autodesk Maya.
Yeah.
I love how it's a giant like cigar shape, and it's like, look how much copyright it's taken.
Right. Like,
and so he's purposely matching the bone structure to the other.
Yeah. So he's
model.
snapping the joints on top of each other, and when you do, I guess the head lines up. I guess. I don't really know what the big issue is here.
And here he's showing
trying
off
to point
that
up
each of
the
the
edge loops line up. Like that's not that. That's not
each
that
one of those
egregious,
circles that make up the. I think it just shows that like they've squashed and stretched this. Usually, what happens when you make a, you're the more expert on this than I am, but usually when you make a circle in 3D design software, there's preset like edge loops on that circle to form the vertices, and then when you start to stretch and squash that model to make the form of the long snake, right? If you want something bunched up, you'll want more edge loops there so it's more defined, and so there could be a reason that if you've started from the same, and they all usually do, right? The sphere that you load into the system to start modeling is usually a base sphere that comes with the software. So it'll be the same for everyone, the starting sphere that they start to squash and mold. And so if you're then taking that same sphere and molding it to the same rough, size, there is a chance that your loops would line up. I don't know how likely it is, but
so to answer your question, just real quick, there actually are multiple types of spheres. but the vast majority of them are the revolved sphere because it's the one that is able to be, scaled to any size easily. The soccer ball or the dodecahedrons or whatever are more accurate spheres because they don't pinch. Like the pinching causes it to be less accurate. If you get a dodecahedron style sphere and you scale that up, it's going to be rounder uniformly than the revolved sphere. But for the argument you're making, this is what they would use. Like literally, I need to build a head, start with a sphere, and then start deforming it, cut it, reshape everything. Try to get rid of the pinches if you need to move them to a different area. This is how it's going to be done. So naturally speaking, if you need to make a tube-shaped character, you're going to use a cylinder and increase the edge loops, and they're going to line up nearly identically because the place where you're going to put the goddamn joint is going to be the same place for the rigging purposes. In order to make it deform properly, you're going to line it up with the edge loops to a degree.
Yeah, and they manually rearrange the joints, which are attached to the edge loops, so they are kind of manually putting the edge loops in the same spot by doing that. So it is I guess thinking about it that way, it is kind of stupid.
It does seem to me like they may have exported the models and then kind of brought them into ZBrush or something, and then changed up the characters completely in ZBrush. Manipulated their posture and stuff a little bit. And I'm okay with that. I don't see an issue with this. I think Palworld took a lot of the characters straight out of Pokemon and then brought it into ZBrush and sketched in ZBrush, because the models from Pokemon are actually pretty simple in terms of a lot of the detail is textured on kind of thing. So the actual base model to work with, you could turn into something else without it being a massive task, right?
I think,
and I bet you that's what they did.
Mainly because, how you can't just copy someone else's code because that's copyrighted. It's kind of like that. You use their proprietary whatever. They made that model originally, so that's the issue more so than it is how similar the design is.
If you were to take a model and load it into Blender or whatever that from an existing game and edit that model to create your new thing, that would be I believe, from a non-lawyer obviously, a what's the word again, derivative work.
Yeah.
So that would be a problem, but they have to be able to prove that happened.
I would argue that it would actually be harder to take a Pokemon model and change it in Blender or Maya or 3ds Max and have it change enough that you could look at it and say, yeah, it's a new thing, than to just do it in ZBrush or something like that. Because in Maya and all those things, you're going to be moving those stuff edge loop by edge loop, and you're going to have to make creative decisions to try to build it into something new. That would take so much fucking time for each of the 100+ characters that it would actually just be easier to do it in ZBrush and sketch it quickly and use that just to come up with the idea for the character. Take the export from Pokemon, bring it into ZBrush, and then you can do stuff where you do a quick rig on it, and then you can move the leg back so the posture is even more dynamic or whatever, so that you can do things to change it so it's not 100% identical. And then you're going to sculpt on top of it to add the clouds or whatever the fuck that one had, and you're just going to do that to kind of get started, right? Honestly, what you could do is say okay, so what we did to copy Pokemon is we asked people to draw the Pokemon from memory.
Yeah.
And then we went with that. It's kind of what it feels like.
If you took a model and you took that data and you put it into ZBrush and you loaded it into ZBrush and it loaded that model's data directly, and then you just kind of use the sculpting tool and the position tool for the rig to warp the model and add some extra details in certain spots, and then now you have a new Pokemon or a new pal. I think legally that would be you're in Schitt's Creek. But again, they have to prove that, and the way they could prove it is potentially if there's like some metadata on the file that somehow gets saved along the chain, or I don't know if that would happen.
I think the smoking gun would be the UV layout. That's something that you would not really change if it wasn't necessary, right? Like UVing stuff takes too much fucking time to begin with. So if you found a bunch of them that were like the closest one-to-one copies as the Pokemon counterpart, and the UV layouts, like literally, like you can lay them on top of each other, because the same topology and everything, they line it perfectly, then you're dead in the water. You've got them,
Yeah. But if they sculpted it from scratch, there's much they have a greater leg to stand on when it comes to
what if they made it from scratch and then they took the Pokemon models and they squished it to match it better?
What if the real controversy here is that they just used the rigs from the Pokemon ones? So they had to build them around it?
Well, there was a comment from the creator that said something along the lines of like, we were doing all the animation by hand or something, and then we found out about rigs.
Wow, that's weird. Palworld developer claims 100 plus pals are original, not AI generated. In their blog post, one of the bigger claims Pocket Pair made is that their 100 plus pals were not AI generated. AI generation has been a frequent accusation made at Palworld by critics due to the creators' less than outraged response to the burgeoning technology. Many critics have chosen to make Mizobe's previous statements out of context to diminish the game.
They also did release a game that you literally used generative AI, so there's that. But
I noticed this after I started making it. It took a month to make one PAL, just the 3D model. Mizobe's journey into game development is starting to say the least, as he recounts a story of how he thought it would take 2,000 days to animate all the PALs in Palworld. It turns out that at the time, Mizobe didn't even know what a rig was for, and what a rig was for animation, and was just doing everything manually. One day, I received a call from a human resources company, and they had found a person named Adachi-san. He was a veteran motion designer with a lot of experience, and apparently he became interested after seeing how Craftopia was made. Then, everything changed when I was hired as a contract worker. Mr. Adachi was also taken aback at first. Did you create the motion in this state? What about the rig? Simply put, a rig is a useful auxiliary mechanism when adding motion. So what they mean by this probably is that they put the skeleton in, but they didn't have the controls that you get to key and animate. So they were just animating the bones. A human joint have a fixed direction of bending. It won't bend any other way. However, if you don't have a rig, you'll have to manually modify the motion each time you create it. Although Pocket Pair is aware of the existence of the rig, it had not adopted it. Also, I didn't even know the word rig. Wow. Well, it sure seems like you're using AI if you don't fucking know what that is.